The last war of Earth ended with silence. Cities turned to ash, skies burned red for weeks, and oceans swallowed the ruins of nations. What once was humanity's home became a graveyard of machines and memories. The alien fleets of the Zevran Empire covered the sky like black wings, ending the resistance that had lasted years. Humanity had fought bravely, but courage could not match the power of the stars. When the smoke cleared, the survivors were gathered. The Zevran ships took them away from Earth, dividing them among different colonies. Some were forced to work in mines, some in alien factories, and some were sold in open markets as servants. Among these survivors was a young man named Daniel. He had seen his family vanish in the last bombing of New Sydney. Now he stood in a cage of glass and metal, surrounded by beings that did not belong to his world. The Zevran were tall, scaled beings with eyes like molten gold and voices that echoed like thunder. They believed in strength, order, and power. To them, humans were small and soft, creatures of emotion and weakness. Yet they were curious about them, for humanity had fought with a fire that even the Zevran admired. Daniel stood quietly as the alien auction began. The hall was filled with strange light. Hundreds of aliens from different worlds filled the seats, ready to buy slaves for labor or entertainment. The auctioneer, a Zevran with blue scales, raised his voice for all to hear. One by one, humans were brought out, priced by their strength or skills. Daniel waited as the line moved forward. When his turn came, the auctioneer called out, "Lot number 43, male human, age 24, no known disease, combat background resistance fighter, opening bid 50 Zevrons," the crowd murmured. Some aliens laughed softly. Others looked with mild interest. Daniel did not bow his head. He stood straight, eyes calm, hands steady. He had already lost everything, so there was nothing more to fear. The bids began, slow and half-hearted. No one saw much value in him. Then, from the far end of the hall, a voice spoke, clear, firm, and royal. 100 Zevrons. The hall fell silent. Everyone turned. A tall figure in silver armor stood near the upper platform. She was unlike the others. Her scales were white with a faint glow, and a long crest ran from her forehead down to her back. Her eyes shone like stars in the night sky. Every Zevran in the hall bowed their heads at once. Even the auctioneer's voice trembled. "Your Majesty, Queen Varela of Zevran, bids 100 Zevrons." The silence deepened. No one dared to speak against the queen. No one raised the bid higher. The auctioneer struck the hammer. "Sold. Lot 43 to Queen Varela." Daniel was taken out of the cage. Chains bound his wrists, though lightly. 2 royal guards escorted him toward the queen's transport vessel. As he walked through the corridor, he could feel hundreds of alien eyes watching him, whispering behind his back. He did not understand their language, but he could sense their confusion. Why would the queen of the most powerful empire buy a simple human? Inside the royal ship, everything shimmered with light. The walls were made of crystal-like metal that shifted colors with every movement. Strange symbols glowed softly and machines hummed quietly. Daniel was placed before the queen, who sat on a throne carved from black stone and silver. Queen Varela studied him for a moment. Her gaze was cold but curious. "Human," she said in clear English, her accent heavy but understandable. "Do you know who I am?" Daniel looked up. "You are the one who bought me." Her eyes narrowed slightly. "That is not an answer to my question." He took a breath. "You are the queen of the Zevran Empire." She tilted her head. "And do you hate me, human?" He did not speak for a moment. The guards tensed, waiting for his response. Then he said, "Hate is useless. It will not bring back what I lost." The queen's golden eyes flickered with interest. Most humans begged or cursed when they were brought before her. This one spoke calmly, without fear. "You are not like the others," she said softly. "You speak without trembling." Daniel looked around the chamber. "Fear has no meaning now. You already have everything. What could I change by trembling?" The queen leaned back in her throne. For a long time, she did not answer. Then she said, "Perhaps I will find out." She turned to her guards. "Take him to the palace. He will serve under my direct command." The guards bowed and led Daniel away. The journey to the palace took 2 days through the void. During the travel, Daniel looked through the ship's windows and saw the stars like bright rivers flowing in darkness. He thought of Earth and wondered if anyone else still remembered its sky. When they arrived, the palace of Zevran rose like a mountain of glass and metal. Towers touched the clouds and giant airships floated above it. The guards led him inside through endless halls filled with alien art, statues, and glowing plants that moved with light. Everything was strange and beautiful but cold. He was brought to a room overlooking the city. It was large but empty except for a bed, a table, and a window that stretched from floor to ceiling. A soft voice spoke from behind. "You will live here." Daniel turned and saw a young Zevran servant smaller than the others. She spoke quietly, avoiding his eyes. "The queen ordered that you be treated as part of the royal service. You will attend her when called." He nodded. "Do I need to bow or something?" The servant looked nervous. "Yes, all must bow before the queen." Daniel gave a faint smile. "Then I'll remember that." That night he could not sleep. The city outside glowed with colors he had never seen before. Flying crafts moved like silent birds in the sky. Yet in that beauty he felt only loneliness. He missed the sound of wind through trees, the scent of rain, the laughter of his friends. He wondered why the queen had chosen him, a human with nothing left. The next morning he was summoned to the grand hall. The queen stood before a council of nobles. When Daniel entered, all eyes turned toward him. The guards pushed him forward and he stopped a few steps away from her throne. Queen Virella spoke without turning. "You are Daniel of Earth." "Yes. You will assist me in my personal research. I wish to understand your species." He frowned slightly. "Research?" The queen finally looked at him. "Yes. Your people fought longer than any other conquered race. You lost your world, yet you did not surrender. I wish to know why." Daniel met her gaze. "Because we had something worth fighting for." "And what was that?" she asked. "Home, family, freedom." The queen's expression did not change, but something in her eyes softened. "Interesting words. Many races speak of freedom, but they mean control. Humans seem to mean something else. Because we know what it feels like to lose it." Her gaze lingered on him for a long time. The hall grew silent. Even the nobles shifted uneasily. The queen had never allowed a slave to speak so freely. But she did not punish him. Instead, she dismissed the council and ordered Daniel to follow her. She led him to a balcony overlooking the city. The air shimmered with energy and great ships moved in the distance. "This empire was built on strength," she said. "Our people believe emotion is weakness. They think mercy destroys order. Yet your kind fought with emotion, not logic, and almost made us fall." Daniel looked at her. "Maybe emotion is not weakness. Maybe it's what keeps us alive." The queen turned to him. For a moment she said nothing. Then she smiled faintly. "You speak boldly for a servant. I speak as a man who has nothing left to lose." Her smile faded, replaced by thoughtfulness. "We shall see if that is true." As days passed, Daniel began to learn more about the palace. He worked in the queen's library, translating human data files that had been taken from Earth. The queen often joined him, asking questions about human art, music, and stories. She listened closely when he spoke of the stars humanity had dreamed to reach before the war. Sometimes she asked about human emotions. "Why do you care for things that fade?" she once asked. Daniel replied, "Because the short things matter most. They remind us to live." Each answer made her pause longer than before. She began to see the human not as property but as a mirror to something she had forgotten long ago. The empire around her was strong but empty. Power had given her everything except peace. In Daniel's quiet strength she saw a kind of freedom that no crown could command. Still the whispers in the court grew. Many nobles questioned why the queen spent time with a human. Some called it a disgrace. Others feared the human might corrupt her with strange ideas. But the queen ignored them. She continued to watch Daniel closely, as if searching for something she could not name. One evening, when the twin moons of Zevran hung above the city, the queen stood alone by her window. She watched Daniel working below in the garden, helping the servants repair a broken light crystal. The sight made her think of Earth, of a world that refused to bow, even when the stars fell against it. For the first time in her long reign, Queen Virella felt uncertain about the empire she ruled. And though she did not yet understand why, she knew the answer might lie in the heart of a human she had bought not as a warrior, but as a lesson. Days passed inside the grand palace of Zevran. Daniel's life changed in quiet ways. He was no longer treated like a common slave, yet he was not free either. The guards watched him wherever he went. Servants whispered when he passed, curious about the human who spoke to the queen as if he were her equal. Queen Virella had given him new clothes, simple but clean, and allowed him to move around the palace gardens when not working. The gardens were unlike anything he had seen on Earth. Trees made of crystal grew beside pools that glowed in the dark. Flowers opened with music, and the air smelled of sweet metal. Yet even in this strange beauty, Daniel felt the emptiness of being the only human among aliens. He spent his mornings helping the Queen's scholars translate human records. They had taken data from the ruins of Earth and tried to understand human languages, art, and science. Daniel explained simple things to them, like what books meant to humans, how families worked, and why humans painted or sang. The scholars often looked puzzled, for emotion was something the Zevran never valued. One afternoon, while Daniel was reading an old Earth file, the doors of the library opened. Queen Varela entered, surrounded by 2 royal guards. The scholars stood at once and bowed deeply. Daniel looked up and nodded in greeting. "Leave us," she told the others. When the scholars left, the Queen walked toward him. "You did not bow," she said. Her voice was calm, but her eyes sharp. Daniel looked at her steadily. "I do not mean disrespect. On Earth we bow only to honor, not fear." The Queen studied him for a long moment. "And what is the difference?" "Fear is when you lower your head to survive. Honor is when you lower it to show respect," Daniel said. "If I bowed to you from fear, it would mean nothing." Her golden eyes softened. "You speak like a warrior, not a servant." "I was both once," he said quietly. The Queen sat across from him. "Tell me about your world again," she said. "Tell me how your people lived before the war." Daniel spoke of oceans, green forests, and cities full of light. He told her about laughter in the streets and families sharing food at night. He described the feeling of rain on his skin, the sound of thunder, and how humans dreamed of reaching the stars one day. The Queen listened in silence. Her face, usually firm and royal, seemed almost gentle. "Your people loved much for a species so short-lived," she said. "That is why we love," Daniel replied. "Because we know our time is short." She turned away, looking out through the tall window. "The Zevran live for centuries. We do not hurry. We build slowly, think deeply, and care rarely. Emotion is treated as weakness. It is taught out of us from birth. When I became queen, I was told that kindness makes rulers fall." Daniel watched her quietly. "Do you believe that?" She looked back at him. "I did. Until I met your kind." There was silence between them. The hum of machines outside filled the air. The Queen finally rose. "Come," she said. "Walk with me." They left the library and walked through the royal garden. The light from the twin suns cast golden shades across the crystal paths. Birds of metal wings flew overhead. The Queen moved slowly, as if deep in thought. "Daniel," she said after a while, "I read about how humans fight for freedom, even when they know they will lose. Why do you do that?" He smiled faintly. "Because freedom is not something you win once. It's something you fight for every day. Even if we lose, the fight means we tried." She stopped walking and turned to him. "You are not afraid to speak like this to me?" "You asked," he said simply. "And I answer what I believe." She looked at him for a long time. "No Zevran would speak to me in such a way. They fear my power. They say what I want to hear." Daniel met her eyes. "Then maybe you need someone who doesn't." Her expression changed again. A small smile touched her lips, rare and almost human. "Perhaps I do." That night the Queen summoned him again, this time to her private study. It was a room filled with old relics from her travels across the stars, statues, maps, and weapons from conquered worlds. She was sitting by a glowing sphere when he entered. "I want to know more about the human heart," she said. "Not the organ, the feeling. You call it love. What is it?" Daniel was caught off guard. "It's hard to explain," he said slowly. "Love is when you care for someone more than yourself. It's when their happiness becomes your own." The Queen looked thoughtful. "That sounds dangerous. It can be," he said. "But it's also what makes us strong. It gives us a reason to live." She stared into the glowing sphere. "We are taught that reason must come from duty, not from feeling." "Then maybe your people forgot something important," he said. Her eyes turned to him again, studying his face carefully. "You speak as if you have loved before." Daniel nodded. "I did before the war. I lost her when the ships came." The Queen's voice grew soft. "I am sorry." He shook his head. "Don't be. Remembering her keeps me human." There was silence again. The Queen rose and walked closer to him. "You are brave to speak of pain so calmly." "Pain teaches us," he said. "It reminds us we still feel." She stopped in front of him, close enough for him to see the faint glow of her scales. You humans confuse me, she said quietly. You are weak in body, yet strong in ways my people cannot understand. Daniel smiled faintly. Maybe strength is not always about muscles or weapons. Sometimes it's about standing when you have no reason left to stand. Her eyes stayed on him. You may be right. From that day on, the Queen invited Daniel more often. They spoke in the gardens, the library, and even in the throne room when no one else was around. She asked about Earth's history, human art, and the way humans treated one another. Daniel answered honestly, even when the truth was not pleasant. He told her how humans made mistakes, how greed and pride destroyed their world, but also how compassion built it again and again. The Queen listened as if hearing a new language. Each story made her wonder what her own people had lost in their hunger for power, but not everyone in the palace approved. The nobles whispered in secret halls. The generals grew restless. Some believed the Queen had become too soft. Others feared that the human might influence her decisions. One night in a council meeting, an elder noble spoke out. Your Majesty, the Empire watches. You spend time with a creature of a broken world. It weakens your image. Queen Varella's gaze turned sharp. You call courage weakness? The noble lowered his head. He is beneath you. He is a servant. She stood, her white armor gleaming under the hall lights. He is a voice that dares to speak truth when others hide behind flattery. If that is beneath me, then perhaps the throne itself is. The hall fell silent. None dared to speak further. The Queen dismissed the council with a cold command. That evening she found Daniel in the garden again. He was tending to the strange glowing plants. She stood beside him without speaking for a while. They hate me because I listen to you, she said quietly. Daniel looked up. Then stop listening if it puts you in danger. Her voice was firm. No, I have ruled through fear long enough. If my empire cannot survive a human's words, then it is weaker than I thought. Daniel nodded slowly. You are braver than most of your kind think, she looked at him. And you are more dangerous than they understand. He smiled faintly. Danger is a word your people use for things they can't control. The Queen's eyes glowed with quiet amusement. Perhaps that is true. Days turned into weeks. Their conversations grew longer. The Queen started asking for Daniel's opinion on matters of rule. She asked what humans would do in certain conflicts, how they would treat conquered people, and why they valued freedom so much. His answers often surprised her, yet she found herself agreeing more than she expected. One morning, as the first sun rose, the Queen stood at her balcony. Daniel was beside her, watching the city awaken. The ships moved like shadows between towers, and the air shimmered with light. Do you miss your world? She asked. Every day, he said. But I learned something here. What is that? That sometimes, even far from home, you can still build something new. She looked at him. And what do you wish to build, Daniel? He turned to her. Hope. Her breath caught for a moment. The word felt strange on her tongue. Hope. It was not a word the Zevran used often. She looked away, hiding the faint emotion that crossed her face. In the days that followed, something began to change. The Queen's orders became gentler. She spared prisoners instead of executing them. She allowed trade with smaller planets once oppressed by the Empire. Her advisors were shocked, but she ignored their warnings. She told them that strength built on cruelty could not last. Daniel noticed these changes but said nothing. He could see that she was fighting an inner war, one between what she was taught and what she was beginning to feel. One evening, as they watched the stars, the Queen spoke softly. Daniel, do you ever wonder why I bought you? He looked at her. Yes, I have wondered since the day of the auction. I did not buy you for service, she said. I bought you because I wanted to understand why your people would rather die free than live under another's rule. And now? He asked. She met his eyes. Now I think I am starting to understand. Her voice trembled just slightly, something no one had ever heard from their Queen. Daniel felt that moment meant more than all the words they had shared. Above them, the stars of the Zevran Empire shone cold and distant. But for the first time, Queen Varella felt warmth inside her heart. A warmth brought not by power, but by the courage of a single human who spoke without fear. The days turned into months, and the bond between Queen Varella and Daniel grew stronger. What had started as curiosity began to change into quiet trust. The Queen still ruled with strength, but her heart had softened. She began to see her people differently. She began to see the world through Daniel's eyes. Many in the palace noticed the change. The queen no longer gave harsh punishments. She listened to common workers and allowed the poor to speak in her halls. She even stopped the long wars that had brought endless glory to her name. Some called it mercy. Others called it weakness. The nobles started to whisper behind closed doors. They met in secret chambers lit by dark lamps. The leaders of the army, the high lords of the empire, and the royal advisors gathered to speak in hushed voices. One of them, Lord Zerath, said, "The queen is not the same. Since that human came, her mind is clouded. If she continues like this, the empire will fall." Another, General Threx, slammed his clawed hand on the table. "A human has poisoned her. He must be removed before he destroys everything we built." The others nodded. They were afraid. The Zevran Empire had survived for thousands of years by strength alone. Now their queen was listening to a fragile being from a dead world. They decided to act quietly, for open rebellion against the queen was dangerous. They would find a way to take the human away from her without direct battle. Inside the palace, Daniel had no idea about the plots forming in the shadows. He continued his work in the queen's library and spent time in her garden. Every day they spoke about hope, peace, and the meaning of life. Their conversations changed her in ways she could not hide. One evening, as the sun set behind the tall towers, the queen called Daniel to her private chamber. She looked troubled. Her golden eyes no longer held the same calm. "Daniel," she said softly, "I hear voices in my court. They say I am losing control. They say you are the reason I no longer rule with power." Daniel looked at her carefully. "And what do you believe?" She turned away from him and walked toward the window. "I do not know. For the first time in my life I am unsure. You have shown me kindness, truth, and courage, but I fear my people will never understand those things." Daniel stepped forward. "Then show them that kindness is not weakness. Show them that a strong heart can lead better than a sharp sword." She looked back at him. "You speak of courage so easily." He smiled faintly. "Courage is only hard before you start." The queen gave a small laugh, but her eyes still carried worry. "You make everything sound simple." "It is not simple," Daniel said. "But it is right." She stood silent for a moment, then nodded. "I will try." That night the queen sat alone in the throne room long after everyone had left. The hall was dark except for the light from the twin moons. Her thoughts were heavy. She remembered the days when she ruled with fear, when no one dared to question her. She had been respected but also alone. Now, with one human's words, she had found peace but lost her image of strength. She wondered if peace was worth the danger it brought. Meanwhile, in the lower parts of the palace, the nobles' plan had already begun. General Threx sent his spies to watch the humans' every move. Lord Zerath bribed some guards to report when the queen met with Daniel. The whispers grew louder with each passing day. One afternoon, as Daniel walked through the garden, he noticed two guards watching him more closely than usual. When he turned to look at them, they quickly looked away. He felt the tension but said nothing. He had lived among enemies before. He knew when danger was close. Later that evening, as he worked in the library, one of the young servants, a Zevran girl named Alira, came to him quietly. Her voice was low and her eyes were filled with fear. "Human," she said, "you must be careful. There are those who want to harm you." Daniel looked up. "Who? I cannot say. They watch everyone. Please stay near the queen." Daniel thanked her and promised he would be careful. After she left, he sat in silence for a long time. He had expected this day to come. Change always made enemies. Still, he could not run. He had come too far to hide now. The next morning, the queen invited him to attend a council meeting. It was the first time a human had ever been allowed inside the royal court. The nobles were furious. When Daniel entered the hall beside the queen, many of them lowered their eyes in anger. The queen sat on her throne and began to speak. "For centuries, our empire has ruled through strength. But I have learned that strength without compassion becomes cruelty. From this day, Zevran will follow a new path. We will rebuild, not destroy." A wave of murmurs spread through the room. Lord Zerath stood up. "Your Majesty, this is not our way. You risk everything by following the words of a creature who does not belong here." The queen's voice was calm. "You will speak with respect in my court." Zerath bowed, but his tone was still sharp. "Then let me speak clearly. Your decisions are dangerous. You listen to a human more than to your own counsel. If we continue this way, our enemies will strike." Daniel watched quietly, saying nothing. He knew he could not speak unless asked. The queen rose from her throne. Our enemies will not strike because of kindness. They strike because they fear our power. But power is not only in weapons. It is also in wisdom. The nobles were silent. Some lowered their heads, others exchanged angry looks. They could not challenge her openly, but their hatred grew. That night, Daniel walked alone through the palace corridors. The halls were quiet, but he felt a strange chill. As he turned a corner, 2 guards stepped out of the shadows. Their eyes glowed faintly in the dark. "Come with us," one of them said. Daniel stopped. "Why?" "No questions." "The queen requests your presence." Something about their tone felt wrong. They were too tense, too cold. He nodded slowly and followed, but his senses stayed alert. They led him through a narrow passage that went deeper into the lower parts of the palace. The air grew cold and the lights dimmed. When they reached an empty hall, Daniel stopped. "Where is the queen?" The guards looked at each other. One of them said, "She will not need you anymore." Before they could move, Daniel reacted. Years of fighting in the resistance had taught him to move fast. He grabbed a loose metal rod from the wall and blocked the first attack. The second guard rushed forward, but Daniel struck his arm and pushed him back. A short struggle followed, but Daniel managed to run toward the exit. Alarms began to ring. Guards shouted across the palace. Daniel ran through the long corridors, knowing the queen had to be warned. He reached the upper hall just as Queen Varela appeared from the opposite side with her royal guard. "Daniel," she said sharply, "what is happening?" He took a breath. "Your guards tried to take me. I think it was a trap." Her eyes darkened. "Who ordered it?" "I don't know, but someone wants me gone." The queen turned to her captain. "Seal the palace. Find the traitors." Within minutes, the halls filled with soldiers. The search began and several guards were captured. Under questioning, they confessed that they had been paid by Lord Zerath and General Threx. The queen's anger burned brighter than fire. She called the council again the next morning. The nobles stood in silence as she entered the hall, her white armor gleaming. Her voice was cold. "You conspired against my rule. You tried to harm one under my protection. That is treason." Lord Zerath tried to speak. "We only acted for the safety of the Empire." "You acted for your own fear," the queen said. "You forgot what this empire stands for." She raised her hand and her guards moved forward. "You will be stripped of your titles and exiled from this world." The council watched in shock as the traitors were taken away. No one dared to speak again. When the hall was empty, the queen turned to Daniel. "They would have killed you." "I should have seen this coming." Daniel shook his head. "You cannot control what others fear. You can only control what you do next." She looked at him with quiet sadness. "You risked your life to tell me the truth." "I only did what was right." The queen stepped closer. "You are the only one in this empire who speaks that word with such certainty." Daniel smiled slightly. "Maybe because we lost everything once. It teaches you what really matters." For a moment, they stood in silence. The air between them was heavy but calm. The queen finally said, "You are not my servant anymore. From this day you will be my advisor." Daniel was surprised. "Advisor?" "Yes," she said. "You will help me rebuild this empire. We will show my people that strength and kindness can stand together." Daniel bowed his head slightly.
"If that is your wish, I will serve with honor." The queen smiled faintly.
"Not with fear?" He smiled back. "Never with fear." In the weeks that followed, Daniel worked beside her. They planned new laws, new ways to treat other species, and new paths for peace. But though the rebellion was crushed, not everyone was loyal. Deep in the Empire's outer worlds, the whispers had not ended. They still spoke of removing the human who had changed their queen. They still planned to strike again. And somewhere in the dark, a greater danger was waiting. One that would test not only the queen's heart, but the bond that had begun to grow between her and the last son of Earth. The night in the Zevran Palace was usually peaceful. The sky above the capital shimmered with golden clouds that moved slowly across the dark horizon. The towers of the royal palace glowed with soft blue light, and the air was filled with a calm hum of power from the energy crystals that powered the alien world. But that night something felt wrong. The guards moved nervously along the hallways, their antennae twitching as if they sensed danger in the air. Daniel could feel it too. His instincts, sharpened from years of surviving on a conquered Earth, warned him that something was about to happen. He had been working in the palace garden, tending to the strange silver plants that grew under the glow of twin moons. When he looked up, he saw a shadow move across the roof of the eastern tower. He turned quickly, his heart beating fast. The garden was quiet, but he could hear faint whispers coming from the nearby corridor. Daniel walked toward the sound. His hand tightened around the small metal tool he had been using. He knew it was not a weapon, but in his hands it could be. Before he could reach the corridor, a strong hand grabbed him from behind and pulled him back. It was one of the royal guards. The guard's eyes glowed faintly in the dark. "Human, stay silent," the guard said in a low voice. "There is danger tonight." "What kind of danger?" Daniel asked. "Traitors," the guard answered. "They move against the Queen." Daniel's chest tightened. He had seen betrayal before. On Earth, during the final war, betrayal had destroyed entire cities. He knew what it could do. "Where is the Queen?" he asked quickly. "In the council hall," the guard replied. "The rebels are coming from the east wing. They will reach her soon." Daniel did not think twice. He ran toward the eastern passage, ignoring the guard's warning. His steps echoed in the marble hallway. He could hear the distant clash of metal and the sharp sound of alien weapons. The air smelled of smoke and burned energy. When he reached the main hall, chaos had already begun. Dozens of armored figures fought in the dim light. The rebels wore dark red armor with a silver mark across their chests, the symbol of the old warlords who once ruled before Queen Virella united the empire. Daniel saw the Queen standing near the center of the hall, surrounded by her loyal guards. Her eyes glowed bright violet and her armor shone with white energy. She moved with grace and power, striking down her enemies with precision, yet there were too many of them. The guards around her were falling one by one. Without hesitation, Daniel ran into the fight. He picked up a fallen staff weapon and swung it at one of the rebels. The strike caught the alien off guard and the rebel fell back. Daniel kept moving, dodging energy blasts and using his quick reflexes to stay alive. He had no training, no armor, and no strength compared to these aliens, but he had courage, and that was enough to keep him standing. "Daniel," the Queen shouted when she saw him. Her voice cut through the noise like thunder. "You should not be here." "I'm not leaving you," Daniel shouted back as he blocked another attack. Virella's eyes widened for a moment. No one had ever spoken to her that way, not even her generals. But there was no time to argue. The rebels were closing in. Suddenly, a blast of energy hit the wall near Daniel, throwing him to the ground. He felt pain shoot through his arm, but he pushed himself up again. The Queen moved forward, her hands glowing with raw power. She released a wave of white energy that sent several rebels flying across the hall. For a moment, the battle slowed. Smoke filled the air and silence hung between the fighters. Then the leader of the rebels stepped forward. He was taller than the others, his armor marked with gold lines. His voice was deep and cold. "You have lost your mind, Queen Virella," he said. "You bring weakness to our kind. You protect a human instead of your people." The Queen raised her chin. "A human who has shown more strength and honor than those who betray their queen," she replied firmly. The rebel leader raised his weapon. "Then you will fall with him." Before he could strike, Daniel moved. He saw the flash of energy and knew where it was aimed, at the Queen. Without thinking, he jumped in front of her. The blast hit him square in the chest and he fell to the ground. The hall went silent. The Queen's eyes widened with shock as she saw Daniel lying motionless. Something inside her broke. She turned toward the rebel leader, her voice cold and full of power. "You dare harm what I protect," she said. Her energy burst out like a storm. The entire hall shook. The rebels were thrown to the ground as white light covered everything. The Queen moved like lightning, striking one enemy after another. None could stand before her. When it ended, only silence remained. Virella knelt beside Daniel. His chest was burned, his breathing shallow. She touched his face gently. "You foolish human," she whispered. "Why would you do this?" Daniel opened his eyes weakly. His voice was faint but steady. "Because you are worth protecting," he said. "You gave me freedom when I had none." The Queen felt her heart twist. She placed her hand over his wound, her energy glowing soft and warm. "You will not die," she said. "I will not allow it." She lifted him carefully and carried him herself through the ruined hall. Her guards followed, silent and shocked. None had ever seen their queen show such emotion. In the royal healing chamber, she laid Daniel on a bed surrounded by glowing stones that repaired wounds and restored strength. The healers worked quickly, guided by her power. Hours passed before Daniel's breathing became steady again. The queen stayed beside him the entire time, refusing to leave. When he finally opened his eyes again, he saw her sitting near him. She was no longer wearing her armor. Her expression was calm but filled with sadness. "You should have stayed in the garden," she said softly. Daniel smiled faintly. "If I had, you might not be here." She looked away for a moment. "You are strange," she said. "You risk your life without fear." "I'm human," Daniel said. "We fight for what we believe in, even when we are scared." The queen thought about his words. She had led armies and conquered worlds, yet this single human had shown more courage than any of her warriors. He had no power, no armor, and still stood beside her when even her generals doubted her. Later that night, when the healers left, the queen stood by the window and looked out at the stars. Her empire was quiet again, but she knew this peace was fragile. Many of her people would see her differently now. To them, she had shown weakness by protecting a human, but to her it did not feel like weakness. It felt like truth. She turned back to Daniel, who had fallen asleep. His face looked calm, his breathing steady. She remembered how he had spoken about Earth, about freedom, love, and hope. Those were things her people had forgotten long ago. She whispered to herself, maybe his world was not so weak after all. The next morning, the court gathered again. The palace was repaired, but tension filled the air. The nobles whispered about the rebellion and the queen's actions. Some believed she had lost her strength. Others feared her even more. Queen Varela entered the hall in full armor, her expression firm. She stood before them and spoke. "The rebellion is over," she said. "Those who raise their weapons against me will face justice. But let this be known to all. Our strength is not built only on fear. It is built on honor and loyalty." The nobles bowed, silent and uneasy. When the meeting ended, Varela returned to the healing chamber. Daniel was awake, sitting up slowly. When he saw her, he smiled. "Did they listen?" he asked. "They will," she said. "They have no choice," he nodded. "Good. You should not let them think you are weak." The queen looked at him for a long moment. "They think I am weak because I protected you," she said. "But I do not care what they think anymore." Daniel met her gaze. "Then you are stronger than they will ever be." The queen felt something warm inside her chest. It was not the pride of victory or the satisfaction of power. It was something far more human. As the stars rose over the alien world that night, the queen sat beside Daniel once more. They spoke of life, of courage, and of change. For the first time in her long reign, she felt peace, not as a ruler but as someone who had finally found something worth fighting for. And in that quiet moment, she knew the truth. The rebellion had not only tested her empire, it had tested her heart, and because of one human's courage, both had survived. The Zevran Empire awoke to a new day. The twin suns rose slowly over the crystal towers of the capital, casting long golden beams across the city. The streets were busy with merchants, scholars, and travelers, but a quiet tension hung in the air. Today was a day the citizens would remember, though few understood why. In the royal palace, Queen Varela moved through the halls with calm purpose. Her white armor gleamed in the sunlight, and her golden eyes reflected the sky. The rebellion had been crushed, but whispers and doubts remained. She had made choices that many of her nobles could not accept. Some called her foolish. Some called her weak. But she knew that her path was right. Daniel walked beside her in the palace gardens, now fully healed from his wounds. The scars of the rebellion were fading, but the memories of that night remained fresh in his mind. He had learned quickly that trust was rare in this empire. Yet in the weeks since the attack, he had grown closer to the queen, not as a servant, but as an advisor and friend. They walked in silence for a while, listening to the gentle hum of the garden's energy crystals. The alien plants swayed slightly as if moving to an unseen rhythm. Daniel finally spoke. "Do you think your people will ever accept me?" he asked quietly. The queen stopped and looked at him. Her gaze was steady, filled with thought. "They may not," she said. "But some things are more important than acceptance. Some truths cannot be ignored even by the strongest empire." Daniel nodded. "I just hope we survive long enough to show them." She gave a faint smile. "We will." The day of the Great Council had arrived. The entire royal court gathered in the main hall, a space large enough to hold hundreds of nobles. The hall was decorated with banners and glowing symbols that shifted color depending on the light. The nobles wore their finest attire, though most eyes were fixed on the queen rather than the decorations. Daniel walked beside her as they entered. He could feel the gaze of dozens of nobles weighing on him, many filled with anger or suspicion. When they reached the throne, the queen raised her hand. The hall fell completely silent. Even the servants and guards stopped moving. Every eye was on the queen and through her on Daniel. She began to speak. Her voice carried across the hall, firm and steady. For centuries, the Zevran Empire has ruled by fear. We believed that strength meant control, and control meant obedience. But fear is fragile. It is a weapon that can break as easily as it bends. Today I declare that this empire will no longer rule by fear alone. Murmurs rippled through the hall. Some nobles whispered to each other. Others looked confused or angry. She continued, I have learned that strength is not only in power. True strength lies in honor, courage, and loyalty. It lies in the heart, not the arm. And I have found such strength in one who many of you call a human, a being from a world you deemed weak and defeated. All eyes turned to Daniel. He stood quietly, unsure if the queen intended to place him in danger by speaking of him so openly. The queen stepped forward. This human Daniel has shown bravery, honesty, and loyalty. He has risked his life for me, for the empire, and for the ideals we claim to hold. I have seen the courage of your people reflected in him, and I cannot ignore it. The hall was completely silent. Even the guards felt tension in the air. The nobles could not comprehend what the queen was saying. To some it was a scandal. To others it was a challenge to everything they had known. Then she spoke words no one expected. I, Virella, Queen of Zevran, choose Daniel not as a servant, but as my consort. I wish to marry him not for power, not for duty, but because he has shown me the meaning of courage, loyalty, and truth. The silence that followed was heavy. The nobles stared, mouths slightly open. Whispers erupted in small clusters, but no one dared speak directly to the queen. The idea of a human being chosen as consort was unheard of. A human, a species considered weak and defeated, was being elevated above every noble in the empire. Daniel felt his heart pound. He could not believe what he was hearing. The queen's words were not a test or a jest. They were real. The queen wanted to marry him, not as a political move, but as a choice of the heart. He stepped forward slowly. Your Majesty, he said quietly, I am honored, but I am just a human. I have no rank, no titles, and no power to offer. The queen looked at him, her expression calm but full of warmth. You have offered what matters most, Daniel. You have offered courage, honesty, and loyalty. Those are gifts no title can give. And that is why I choose you. The nobles began to stir, some in anger, some in disbelief. Lord Zerath, who had once conspired against Daniel, stood rigidly. His face was pale, his voice trembling. Your Majesty, this is impossible. A human cannot marry a queen. The queen's gaze turned sharp. Impossible is only what has not been done. Daniel is not a servant. He is a being of courage, and he has my respect. To question this is to question the empire itself. The room grew silent again. Daniel took a deep breath. He felt the weight of every eye on him. He thought of Earth, of the people he had lost, of the courage it had taken to survive. I accept, he said finally. Not because I seek power, but because I believe in what you are building. Together we can do more than fear ever could. The queen's eyes softened and a faint smile appeared on her lips. Then let it be so, she said. For the first time in centuries, a human stood beside the Queen of Zevran, not as a slave, but as her chosen companion. The nobles were shocked, but they dared not protest. The energy of the queen's presence was unyielding, and the hall fell silent once more. After the council, the queen and Daniel walked through the palace gardens. The alien plants shimmered in the late afternoon light, and the air was calm. Daniel finally spoke. Do you think they will ever accept this? He asked. They will have to, the queen replied. Change is never easy, but it is necessary. The empire will survive not because of fear, but because it learns to follow the heart as well as the mind. Daniel looked at her. And you? Do you ever doubt your choice? She shook her head. Never. You have shown me what true courage looks like. That is more powerful than any army or weapon. Days turned into weeks, and the empire began to adjust to the new reality. Daniel was given the title of advisor to the queen. He worked beside Virella, helping her implement new laws and policies. The citizens of Zevran slowly began to see the benefits of compassion and fairness in leadership. Conquered worlds were treated with respect, and trade flourished. Even the former rebels who had been captured, were given a chance to serve the Empire honestly, guided by the principles Daniel and Varela taught. Slowly, loyalty returned, not out of fear but out of trust and respect. Through all of this, Daniel and the Queen's bond grew stronger. They spent long nights discussing strategy, morality, and the stories of Earth. They laughed, they debated, and they planned. Slowly, the palace that had once been filled with cold efficiency began to feel like a home. One evening, Daniel and Varela stood on the balcony, watching the stars. Ships glided silently between the towers, and the light of the twin suns faded into the violet of dusk. "Do you ever think about Earth?" the Queen asked softly. "Every day," Daniel replied. "But I have found a new home here. Not just in the palace, but with you." Her eyes softened. "And I have found something I never thought I would. A human who reminds me that strength is more than power, that courage is more than fear, and that love can exist even in the harshest of worlds." They stood in silence, watching the stars together. The future was uncertain, but for the first time both felt hope. Hope that the Empire could change. Hope that the people could see the value of compassion. And hope that together they could build something stronger than fear. As the night deepened, Daniel turned to the Queen. "We have a long path ahead." "Yes," she said, holding his hand. "But we walk it together." Above them, the stars of Zevran shone bright. One human who had been bought as a slave had changed the heart of a queen. And one queen who had ruled with strength and fear had learned from a human what true courage and loyalty meant. The Empire would remember this day for centuries. Not because of war or conquest, but because of the choice of one queen and one human who had dared to follow what was right rather than what was expected. And in the quiet of the palace, beneath the light of twin moons, Daniel and Queen Varela stood side by side, knowing that together they could face anything, even the stars themselves.